can feel the heart rate. It's been a little over a month since I lost my Doberman Pinscher, Suki, and she was 8 years old. Suki was a very special being. I can't even begin to tell you how many nights I found refuge cuddling with her. And it is precisely that sense of refuge, of solace, and the possibility of new beginnings what kept me coming back to my dog after the craze of the day until it became a necessity of my soul. But I'm not here to talk about Suki. That's Suki. I'm not here to talk about Suki only, but I must say that the idea of regurgitating her loss, still fresh, all of a sudden became a lot more appealing to me than what I had originally intended to present to you here today. Perhaps, after all, there is an invisible yet tangible silver lining behind the feelings of non-belonging, not belonging, and yearning and abandonment that we carry on our backs as refugees, immigrants, and hyphenated identities. I've been looking for water lilies on the pavement, for a diamond shine in the eyes of city walkers. Oh, village boy, beware of the promise of an endless night under the bridges. Life is also blue port, setting the trap for the sailor. But I will walk away, and I will raise umbrellas against the rainstorm, and I will ask the stranger, not for the loss, but for the return of my rainbow. Where is my rainbow? Are there rainbows in New York after the storm? New York is really what did it for me. I don't think that I ever had a sense of identity before I moved to New York. Or perhaps my sense of identity had always been compromised. It had been compromised because I was always told who and what to be. It was compromised by politics. It was compromised by living during my early childhood years under regimes. There was always the issue of concealing what you really thought about things, about life, about yourself. And when I came to New York in the early 90s, 1991 to be exact, I found what I needed in order to be able to reassess the idea that I had about myself. And that was a time when people were very creative. In the East Village, it hadn't been gentrified yet. So people hadn't still moved to Williamsburg and other boroughs in order to be able to survive as artists. So it is in New York where I gain that sense of identity. We can all do this, right? It's a haiku for the hopeful. Can you help me with this? I'm starting to like rainy days. I have a spare sun in my wallet, after all. I created underneath the accent of my skin as an umbrella as a creative umbrella to bring art to the community. And when I say art, it's primarily in the two main disciplines that I utilize in order to express myself and my ideas: creative writing and visual arts. So underneath the accent of my skin came about as a personal need to bring into the picture where I was coming from, the idea of what it is to be, first, a refugee, because I came to America as a political refugee. And we do have the definition of refugee here. According to the American Heritage 5th edition, I want to be clear with the citations here, yes? So there I was, and that also is part of who I am. But the journey doesn't end there, right? So these are dynamic concepts, and I also what I have realized over the years is that that term particularly doesn't do justice to how I think of myself, and that perhaps the idea of being a refugee was another identity at some point, but I don't think that after being in this country for 20-something years, I'm still a refugee. So I found this other concept, right, which is immigrant, and I think that in one way or another we can all relate to that, unless you're an African American or a Native American. We are all immigrants in one way or another. And I do have the definition of immigrant here. And then I run into this. In his article, The Value of a Hyphenated Identity, published by the Center for Immigration Studies on January 19th of 2011, Dr. Stanley Renshin argues that hyphenation helps new immigrants resolve a very personal and consequential set of questions. How can I acknowledge who I am while at the same time recognizing the reality of a fresh start in a new country of whose community I would like to be a part? But it does more than this. The core of identity's value, this is the Jews. The core of identity's value in the United States is that, in spite of efforts on the part of some to make it ascribed on the basis of race, gender, economic status, or nationality, identity here remains fundamentally a matter of personal choice. Identity is a matter of personal choice. And that personal choice, for me, was to become an artist and to become a writer. One of the most interesting things that happens to any individual in the process of growing up and maturing as such is the fact that we understand that identity is ultimately a construct. We have always been told who to be and how to behave, right? There isn't really a real identity until you find that in arts, particularly in poetry and in the visual arts. The possibilities that art gives to humans in regard to reassessing who they think they are and where they come from is limitless. Everything else is limited, up and over. I see them walk by, bar soaps on their mordant, trenchant, tremulous feet. I see them journeying the one-block city express. I see them meandering, crawling, crowing, crooking, crooning, cropping, crossing, leaning against, jumping against. I see them walking by, walking by, walking by, marching platoon of the lonely, at the mercy of 24 times 7, 365 days of one desperate season. I see them at the mercy of the wind, at the mercy of the snow, at the mercy of full moons without tangible territory, and the grayish skyline around New York's gigantic garbage cans under neon lights and softer street lamps in a hurry. I see them, running runners. I watch them on the corners, asexual, apolitical, asocial, uncertain, unmanageable, apocalyptic, and suicidal. I feel them terrified in the midst of the Tellurian storm of this century. I see them, as I've seen myself, somber, fragile, and deserted. I watch them still looking for the endless rock and countless fall. I look at them and silently remind myself of who I am. At the very core of defining one's identity, there is a sense of vulnerability. It's impossible to understand human nature without coming from a place of relatedness. And that is ultimately what vulnerability gives to us. In the world of the poet, in the realm of art, one of the things that the most important thing, in my opinion, in regard to the lessons that we learn from arts and the humanities, is that it develops in us the ability to be able to relate to somebody else, not based on differences, but based on our similarities. Ultimately, we have a lot more in common than the differences that set us apart. Haiku for the destitute. Can we all do this? I have more than pennies in my pocket. I have the uncertainty of life that always keeps me grounded. Exile. Time is my tasteless, abstract friend, refusing to be measured by the ticking of the clock. Time is all I have. When I shut down my windows to the world, I am absent from familiar voices. My body will return someday to interstellar dust, transient and secular. I will always carry the seed of a new life into heaven. Oh, my lighthouse, precision envelops my crystal sword again, the prophet's mystery finally revealed. A man's is also a cave made out of shadows and winged castaways. One of the main problems that I think I always encounter when trying to define to others who I was, people were always interested in, and sometimes it was the accent. And I remember when I was a student at the Columbia University American language program, one of the professors said, you can lose everything else except for the accent because the accent is sexy and that's going to open a lot of doors for you, right? So I refused to take accent reduction classes. But I am also a man of faith. So it was always difficult to make myself understood when coming as well from that perspective. And then on top of that, I came out of the closet, so that made it even more complicated. And then I also come from a family that is a family that dwells in extremes. On the one hand, there is the good Cuban-American Republican family in Florida. And then on the other hand, there was the good, well-intentioned communist father who, and that was in Cuba, who ended up becoming a refugee in his own right because of his political ideas. So again, when we try to define ourselves by virtue or by virtue of ideology or politics, we do a disservice to our most inner nature as citizens of the world that we all are. And it is very important also to understand that even as citizens of the world, for me at least, I live in a very specific place in a country that is undergoing transformation, a very young country, and I have a lot of hope in our future. And that hope continues to fuel my sense of identity and also my duty in life. And that is part of the mission of Underneath the Accent of My Skin as a creative umbrella. And we have a question and answer with the Sphinx. Question 1, where to anchor my eyes? Answer, build no nest. Question 2, how to appease the water that sheathes my forbidden island? Answer 2, stretch your safety net. Question 3, what borders withhold the fury of the wind? Answer 3, become the bird that never leaves the air. The last thing that I like to share with you today is that poetry saved my life, and I don't think that I would have been the same person if I hadn't found poetry in my life. And I'm not just talking about poetry as a genre in the creative writing field. I'm also talking about visual poetry as well, right? When we engage in a creative visual activity, photography or painting, because they stretch our ability also to relate, to have compassion, and to continue to grow as spiritual beings that we also are, because we are all interconnected. And that sense of belonging, that sense of relatedness, only makes sense to me, at least to the full extent of the word, when I am in the presence of poetry. I used to bounce off the strings of insurmountable universes, delirious me. I used to leap into the trajectory of comets forever, shooting gold and silver in the sky. I used to rise above the supernova, blasting the seeds of life into eternity until I found you, the sum of all metals and all colors, the sound and the silence of my sheltering bones. Thank you.